This is the Jack D. Deal Network. Thanks for watching. My day started out with a rather long conversation with a Mexican-American friend of mine who has reported many of his friends are now either going back to Mexico or planning to go back to Mexico in the near future, saying that the American dream has come to an end for them in California. This is something that we noticed several years back. But being a Californian these days can be very depressing. All you have to do is pick up the newspaper, and one of the papers I've read for many, many years is the San Jose Mercury News. Today's paper was just filled with the doom and gloom of what's going on in California. On page 1, we see an article about Willow Glen, which is a very affluent neighborhood in San Jose, Santa Clara County, which is Silicon Valley Central. And the real estate problems there, primarily focusing on the new American Gothic, or those that can't sell their upper end homes, houses that are valued between $1 and $3 million. Interesting piece. Many folks can't retire or just can't find buyers because who can qualify for a $2 million mortgage these days? On the same page, it's another interesting piece about Silicon Valley being very upset, particularly Hewlett-Packard, Cisco, and Oracle, very large Silicon Valley companies, upset with the Obama administration proposing to tax their overseas revenues. And for many years, these companies, many of who have businesses, over half their businesses outside the United States, have used this as a form of tax shelter. What's interesting is these companies and their executives fully support the bailouts and the taxpayers funding the government's programs to stem the meltdown, the depression, or the recession. But yet when it comes to their pocketbooks, they definitely don't want to do that. As I flip through the paper here, I come on page 5. Warren Buffett praises the economic moves. Not unusual, considering that Mr. Buffett apparently is indirectly perhaps one of the largest beneficiaries of the bailout. Going through the paper, it continually doesn't get any better. We see an article in the Chrysler bankruptcy, which is great work if you can get it, because on the one hand, the government is recommending that Chrysler go bankrupt, and on the other hand, wanting to give them a $9 billion loan. So, like the Three Stooges says, nice work if you can get it. So you flip to the back page in the editorial, it's just filled with good news. One is about here, Proposition 1E, not the time to cut mental health services. As you may or may not know, California's had a real budget crisis. And in May 19th, we're going to vote on 6 measures, or propositions as they're called. One of these is Proposition 1E, which would take funding from mental health services, particularly youth mental health services, and help balance the budget. If you know anything about mental health, if you catch a young mentally ill person when they're 8 or 10 or 12, it's certainly much better than catching them when they turn 20 or 25. And in this day and age where these sorts of programs are effective, it makes absolutely no sense to take this money and to try to balance the budget in that form. George Will wrote one, California's dug its own grave. That makes us feel good. And he, of course, as expected, is a rather conservative individual and pans all of the proposals or the measures. Basically, the letters to the article, letters to the editor today, pretty much slam the state legislature for not doing their job and then trying to set it out for the voters to accomplish that for them. It makes absolutely no sense. As we go to the next other sections, on section B here, town of Gilroy, which is in Santa Clara, is basically bankrupt at this point. They're having to lay off, I shouldn't say bankrupt, but they're in a severe deficit and in a severe downturn. They had to lay off fire and police. And what's interesting here is if we look at the actual budget for the city and where their revenues and expenditures come from, what we see is a very interesting phenomenon here, that basically What it says is sales tax and property tax account for almost 60% of their revenues, and both of these have been hit extremely hard as property values in Gilroy have dropped in some areas as much as 50%. Gilroy is a feeder suburb to San Jose, Santa Clara County, and Silicon Valley, and is facing locally some very strong, a very strong downturn in business. And the last one I wanted to look at was Willow Glen, the same affluent neighborhood that was on page 1. This is on the business section. It's showing how local businesses are having a lot of trouble trying to survive, and how retail stores some are closing, some of the old businesses are closing. Those that are still operational are trying to do all sorts of things, trying to combat particularly the online purchases that have hit into their revenues. So today is just one day in the life of California, but definitely a depressed day. And unfortunately, it appears for the great state of California, we're going to continue to see these kinds of days in the months, weeks, and years ahead.